fullness on day one. What's day two? Clearly, there's a little bit more energy to that. But welcome back. My name's, for those that didn't join yesterday, my name's Tyler Plant, and I'm the Chief Revenue Officer here at Simpli5. For any of you that missed day one, here's just kind of a quick recap that I think many of you saw in an email last night. But our keynote, Edie Weiner, President and CEO of the Future Hunters, gave us a new and kind of fresh perspective on how to think about the future and what steps and approaches that we can take today to shape tomorrow. We heard from Dr. Morris Singer and Dr. Smithson from Intent Health Strategies on how they're disrupting and redesigning healthcare from really the inside out. Kevin Bishop from LinkedIn, who's the Principal Talent Development Partner there, joined us to talk about career building. So really a balanced kind of day, which I think we really enjoyed. There's a lot of conversation at the end of it, a lot of enthusiasm. So for those that are new to today, if you you entered through our virtual event lobby, so if you haven't gone back in and explored, we'll have a couple breaks today. Go and explore, download resources. Most importantly, you can earn some points for some Simpli5 swag, these super cool, Excite specific sunglasses. They're in 4 flavors and colors. So make sure you choose the ones that match your profile on the way out the door. Couple other notes. For those that were here yesterday, you might have seen a couple new tiles. We're going to have a networking opportunity for people to kind of meet a new friend. So you'll see that in the Simpli5 Connect. I'll talk about that a little bit later on before the break. And then we also added a survey button. So as you leave today, would love to hear your feedback. Karen's also going to mention this in her closing statements, but it's a tile just right and kind of near the main stage. And we'd love to know your feedback to make this bigger and better for next year. We have another incredible lineup of speakers today, and I want to encourage your questions during the session. So like yesterday, to participate, make sure you place them in the chat. You can do that at any time during the session. And then we'll do our best to moderate all of them at the end, depending on the volume that we get. But this time, we'd actually like to ask if you're comfortable coming on camera. We'll spotlight you, and you can actually ask your question live. We'll be communicating with those that actually put a question into the chat, so we won't just spring it on you. We'll have a dialogue on the side to make sure you're comfortable with that. So without further ado, let's get into our session today. So I'm excited to welcome back to the main stage Simpli5 founder and CEO Karen Gordon, who is going to moderate and kick off our next panel discussion. So Karen, over to you.
Thank you. Well, I am thrilled to be here for our second day. I felt yesterday went really well. Got a lot of positive feedback. Appreciate all the support and all the shout outs that we saw in various places. And I cannot wait to kick things off today. We have an incredible couple of speakers who are going to start us off. We're going to begin today with Heather Currier Hunt. So let me tell you a little bit about Heather. Heather's built a career building people up. She's empathetic, intuitive. She's currently the Global Director of Learning and Development and also an Associate Principal at Perkins & Will. Prior to joining Perkins & Will, she led teams at IDEO as they navigated career transitions, implementing research into action, and creating impact at individual and organizational levels alike. At the heart of Heather's work is the belief that there is present, emerging, or future leader within everyone. She excels at guiding team members to their fullest potential across learning and development. She designs and embodies the conditions for others to find their strengths, that see things for themselves that were previously unimagined, and make a plan to achieve it. She's also quite famous for her out-of-office messages. Very creative, lots of fun. Heather is that rare combination of kindness, compassion, optimism, and hope, while still being mission-driven and just highly accomplished. So please join me in welcoming my good friend and an all-around great human, Heather Currier Hunt.
Oh my goodness, Karen, wow. So lovely to hear. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I am honored to be with you today. I've been so excited about our topic of Reframe and had a couple of ideas that I wanted to make sure that we discuss. But, before we get into it, let's go back to the beginning a little bit. All the way back to 2011, a simpler time, I was introduced to what was then called 5 Dynamics as a member of the IDEO talent team. And this was a tool being used in a few of the Northeast studios very much as you might expect, right? An icebreaker, a way to kick off a project team, a fun bit of, it feels like somebody saw into my brain wizardry, right? Very effective for blowing people's minds, but it was not being used much past those kind of initial moments of getting something going. Now, as a learning person who has seen the efficacy of the 70-20-10 model very much in action, I'm always thinking about how our people learn in the day-to-day. So if you're not familiar, the Center for Creative Leadership did a research study in the 80s about essentially what made folks successful. And they reported that 70% of their growth was obtained through stretch assignments, very much in the work. 20% through mentorships and relationships, more social learning. 10% obtained through formal things like trainings. So I am always thinking about how our people are learning in the day-to-day, in real moments where they're challenged, where they can fail, but they're going to come out the other side wiser, a little more expert, possessing some real experience. And a parlor trick quiz was just not doing it for me. I was attempting to design the conditions for creativity and its happy outcome innovation to really thrive. And I was experimenting with how the combination of programming, tools, and partnerships actually build skill sets and mindsets, but also how to get real about the more human realities of collaboration and tackling significant design challenges where everyone's best intentions can really go completely off piste. And taking another look at the tool, what was so obvious to me was its focus on the sequence of work itself. So from explore to excite, to examine to execute. This so immediately mirrored our ways of working, our project cadence. And it seemed to me that the tool could be applied much more holistically. I placed a bet that it could offer value at different moments in the project cycle. And I wanted to explore what that looked like. So I spent the last 13 years or so tinkering, prototyping, piloting, and launching to learn. From my seat today, having done this now across 2 organizations, I can share that there were some really interesting surprises along the way. And these surprises reframed my thinking from what I believed a tool like this should be, or how I thought it should be used, to something else entirely. So today, I'm here to offer 3 stories of those surprises in the hope that they generate some new ideas for you. You're all so brilliant out there. I'm really hoping you can help me out and share some of your insight. I'm always looking to learn. And I also want to save you some time. This is kind of the, like, I've made these mistakes so you don't have to presentation, and I genuinely hope that it is helpful to you. All right, let's start with story number 1, the designer. In those early days, I pulled Simpli5 into team sessions where groups of designers were about to kick off a project. So these were folks who may have worked together many times in the past or were just meeting for the first time, folks that had been at the firm for ages and folks who had been there for 5 minutes. And I can still feel the energy of those moments now. They had a unique quality to them, vulnerable, more than a little ambiguous, posturing a little bit as people tried to demonstrate their strengths, but also exciting. Everything is possible, and who knows where this journey is going to take us. It's also a room full of individuals. So this is a team in name only. They either think they know everything already, or they are desperately trying to make sure that their new teammates don't discover that they know nothing at all. And a few weeks or months after this kind of a meeting is where teams can go completely off of the rails. And that's when folks like me get called in to do a diagnostic of what's creating the problems. And when I do, I would hear language still focused on the individual. The words, it's all I and you, and sometimes even the dreaded they, as in, you know, they won't give me the resources, or they aren't being clear, even though more often than not, they are the they, but that's a conversation for another time. Back to the designer. Okay, I was with a team And I would always start in the same place. Let's make sure that folks understand their assessment. What's resonating for you? What are you noticing? What's coming up as you've read your results? And one of the designers was really upset about his report. He wanted to know the science behind this thing. I don't understand because this is completely wrong. This isn't me at all. Tell me more, oh dear designer. And he shared, well, it says that I'm not good at being with people, and I'm a consultant. I'm with people all day long, whether that's teams or clients, and I'm amazing at it. People love being with me. I can sell, this just isn't making sense. And I was able to validate this designer and say, I know that to be true. You are an excellent consultant. One question, at the end of the day, what's your wind down routine when you go home? After you've spent the day working with teams and with clients, where are you at? And he said, well, I go home, I close my curtains, I get into bed, I pull the covers over my head, and I just try to breathe. I was like, yeah, that's it. That's your result. That's what that means. This is not about your competency. This is about your energy and what it's either giving or taking. And you could see sort of the visible relaxation and a willingness to engage. And like, okay, well, in that case, my assessment was 100% accurate. This is completely me. Like, okay, good, cool. What I felt really sure of, right, was that we were going to see how these individual awareness of energetic preference was going to lead to a better understanding of how folks show up on teams. What I didn't expect was how much it would fuel empathy, and then how that empathy would become a force for prognostication. So let's go back to the story for a second. After the designer felt clear on what his results truly meant, we asked a simple question: how might this information serve all of you as you go on this journey together? How would you apply this knowledge? But it wasn't just knowledge, information, data. There was care, concern, and a newfound empathy. And just in time, because this team was about to go with a client into the field in South America for a multi-week research trip. I'm not making this up. This means sharing every day together, every meal, all day in interviews, debriefing over dinner, right? And I can see the designer grokking this. But I also saw his team having the aha moment that this could be the ne plus ultra depletion event of this designer's midlife. And they started to troubleshoot. They named that this could be an issue, and they started to come up with agreements to address it. Specifically, they just agreed as a team to let him skip the team dinner so that he could recover and come back ready to rock the next day, because they really needed him. But there was more than that. One of his teammates named that after working with this designer many times in the past, he carried a little bit of resentment with him. He had felt a little historically abandoned when this designer had skipped that dinner or kind of disappeared at social events, and now was seeing things entirely differently. What we saw was how in this session, a team went from me to we, from individuals trying to demonstrate value to a team that had awareness of each other's preferences, clarity on how those preferences would actually inform the intricacies of their work, and a way to name these things in service of their collaboration and team success. Empathy is the fuel for collective prognostication, troubleshooting, request making, and the co-design of solutions means everything when we consider what our work has become, more complex than ever, how we work today, hybrid, here, there, nowhere, and how we hope to be at work, maybe even some full version of ourselves. The surprise was how deep they could go, how far from me to we, using empathy as this new fuel to power a project cycle from start to finish. I built on this experience over and over, delivering these sessions for teams where they not only gained some, self-awareness, but they understood team dynamics in a way that they really were not equipped to understand before, and now had a vocabulary for forecasting together. Let's talk about our second story, the team. Okay, bear with me, and I can't see all of your faces, but y'all just close your eyes for a moment while you picture a place of work. Come with me on a journey. Are you doing it? Maybe in your place of work, you're seeing a cafe where folks are gathering to share lunch, or a meeting room where someone's presenting to a full table. Maybe it's a computer screen just littered with boxes of people's faces in them, like a morbid twist on the Brady Bunch opening. Any of those things. And in those spaces, what do you notice? Perhaps it's that people look remarkably similar, or maybe radically different. That some faces are focused while others are a million miles away. Perhaps we notice that the energy of the room has a great deal to do with external factors acting on the people gathered inside. Whether that's physical space or virtual one, could be the size of the room, the technology being used, or maybe the power dynamics of the system that everyone is in. You can open your eyes again if you haven't already. Everyone, above all things, when I think about this, I see potential, often locked up in a scarcity mindset. And it's all locked up because these spaces can drive scarcity thinking. And in scarcity environments, we will protect our resources. We will hoard them even, like a body does water in the heat. The language of work can really make you feel this way. We talk about lack of budget, not enough time, missing skills, being lean. But of course, at work, we sit in an embarrassment of riches, being amongst others. There are endless combinations of skills, experiences, identities, approaches, you name it, that makes collaboration or working in teams explosively catalytic, truly where we become greater than the sum of our parts. What if you had a mechanism to make more visible the gifts that exist across your people and be able to catalyze that to action with a shared vocabulary? Back to our team for a sec. Let's consider this very real team together for a moment. And what do we see here? I mean, I'm seeing an even Steven team. This is feeling like, oh, cool, no problem. Everything's covered. We're in deliberate plus across all of our dynamics, right on that cusp of effortless, smooth sailing, right? Yeah, totally. Until we peek at the spider graph of individuals in that same ridiculously well-balanced team and consider these individual preferences. What do you see here? My eye, I have to tell you, is immediately drawn to that upper left corner where the light blue and red are the last people to leave the party people. And then immediately over to the top right where the darker blue and yellow just are desperate to get into an Excel spreadsheet. And that those four individuals do not meet anywhere else. Woe is actually, for those of you that don't know, a professional term that we use in learning and development to connote interpersonal dynamic chaos with the potential for an HR violation. Just thought I would offer that to you. Let's look at this team again. So this team is made up of very senior leaders from a business services team. In their role, they're all one-offs. So they're the very top of their vertical. But they have to make critical decisions together, set strategy together, demonstrate value together to an organization that relies on their collective expertise. And spoiler alert, that person in the bottom explore and execute, that one person is the only C-suite leader in that team. So what we see here are leaders with very different preferences for doing work, all critical to team success. In aggregate, they have absolutely everything, an abundance of energy for what we need to get work done well. But the experience of the team can feel very different when all of that is invisible to you, right? And you can't see this. The unseen leads to the misunderstood. And here's what I discovered over and over again using this tool with teams. If you ever hope to be greater than the sum of your parts, you are going to have to value what everyone brings to the table in their own way. What's powerful here is that the many dynamic stages of work, these modes, are equally important to sustaining a successful outcome. Being able to see the diversity in front of you in any group of people as a core and necessary contribution to overall success is a reframe, from scarcity to abundance. When we are able to make the invisible visible, not only do our people feel seen and appreciated, better engaged in the work, but organizations can honor difference in an authentic, non-performative way by recognizing that difference itself holds critical value. The surprise is always how we can sit in the midst of so much abundance and minimize it into nothing. We grind off edges thinking that it will make things smoother, but you shatter the gem. If we want to be honest brokers and helping people manifest their potential as leaders, as talent practitioners, as organizations, then we need to see our people as different and whole in order to go from a scarcity to an abundance mindset. For this team, that meant seeing each other's differences as the very value of their partnership, respecting that they were going to have to rely on each other if they didn't want to miss things. You know, that C-suite person in the lower half there, they were planning on retirement in the near future. And this group of one-offs recognized that if they were going to have continued success in delivering strategy, decisions, and value, they were really going to have to support each other in moments of getting stuff done. Perhaps even find someone to come in for a boost in a particularly strategic moment. All right, our third story, the new company. So I've been at Perkins & Will, which is the world's second largest architecture firm, for about a year now. It's a much larger place than IDEO, about 2,800 employees. It has a global footprint with 30 studios worldwide. The firm is almost 90 years old, and our people stay. We have remarkably long tenures and incredibly rich legacy. Soon after starting, I introduced Simpli5 in a soft launch. Not a rollout that was mandated, but an invitation to explore a tool that was new to them. But of course, at first blush, no one thought this was new. Quite the opposite. I was back to parlor trick land. You know, I heard over and over again some version of like, oh yeah, no, I've done this before. It's like Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram, DISC, fill in the blank. We've been speaking a lot about language, the importance of giving language to individuals to describe preference, language to a team to have empathy for each other and prognosticate future challenges with a way to create solutions, language for organizations to make the invisible visible and honor the value in difference. When launching a tool like this, you need to be very deliberate and hold a boundary for language here too. Because you're breaking a mental model. You're going to have to say over and over again, Simpli5 is totally unique in its field. You have to be a broken record in service of drumming out what people think this is because of their previous experiences with other tools, and make space for the fact that this has nothing to do with competency or personality. Correct people. Don't let them get the wrong end of it. Tell them why it's important that they know the difference. Don't let folks call it a quiz without saying something. It's the moment to go slow, to go fast. It takes time and repetition to break a mental model. In almost every organization, people have experienced some version of a psychometric assessment tool. And their mental model is entirely around assessment, right? That's what they understand it to be. Now, there is deep vulnerability when engaging with a tool like that. The language, again, is often about scarcity. You're good at this and bad at that. You're of this, not of that. People are understandably cautious when using these tools because they want to know exactly what it is going to be used for. Because if they rate a certain score, will it hold them back? Will it limit them? Or will it open up more opportunities? Therefore, I have found it absolutely critical to go slow, to go fast, and take the time to break the model, to educate, to demonstrate what this tool is and isn't, and to inform where it's going to show up, and let people know that it's not going to show up in places that you have seen these things before. The systems and processes that it should be embedded in are things that are all about empathy, collaboration, and creativity. All right, so let's go back to this new company. In the early spring, we launched To Learn. We tested a hypothesis. If we took the time to slowly educate, to break that mental model, to show how the tool could support things like empathy and valuing difference in cross-collaboration, would there be more pull than push? We applied Simpli5 across different moments. Certainly team kickoffs, yes, but also check-ins with more established teams. We applied it in a little bit of diagnostics and helping people become better diagnosticians of what may be creating issues, for maybe spotting some big opportunities on the horizon. We used Simpli5 to build trust between individuals that are working together in some new ways, or to make change more palatable in moments of reframing relationships driven by a shift in roles, maybe a reorg. We've already blown through our initial licenses in our initial launch, and I imagine by this time next year, everybody at the firm will be using Simpli5. But what is so important to me is the feedback that we are getting from our people. Folks are saying that they are having conversations that they were previously unable to have, that projects are feeling better supported as teams have this language for addressing the things that so often have gotten in their way. We are also hearing about our teams using the tool with clients to deepen relationships and trust and to develop empathy, not just for the I, me, minds, but the we, us, ourselves. My final reframe is for all of us as we explore these tools and methods. This is not a fun quiz to take, but a method for people and teams to thrive. We have to rethink, reintroduce, and reframe what these tools are here to deliver, because when people thrive, we see innovation and solutions, inclusion and belonging catalyzed as a result. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Heather. You've given us so much to think about. And I know everyone's anxious to get to their questions for you, but first we're going to hear from Susan, and then we'll all come together and have our fireside chat to talk about, all the great things that you guys have both done, and can't wait to dig in a little deeper. So let me tell you a little bit about Susan. She currently serves as the head of strategy for personalized medicine at Genentech Roche. In this role, she brings together creative leadership with decision-making and long-term futures thinking. Previously, she spent almost a decade at the design and innovation firm IDEO, where she worked alongside Heather. And the first chapter of her career was an early employee building Google's operation in Europe. Susan's an active advisor in the future of work and talent network space, and a frequent guest lecturer in topics related to her experience and interests. Susan loves learning more than anyone that I know. I jokingly tell her that every time I have a conversation with her, I add about 6 more titles of books to my list of things that I have to read. Susan's a repeat presenter and a fan favorite from last year's event. But not to worry, Susan never does the same thing twice. With her High Explorer, ideas are constantly brewing, and she weaves them together beautifully in a magical web. It's my great pleasure to introduce my friend and thought partner, Susan O'Malley.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. It's such a great honor to be here. I am going to pull up my slides if you bear with me for 1 second and just check that my camera is working. Okay, team, I believe we're there, but if not, let me know. So excited to be here today. You know, I was thinking about how to start the talk, and last year we started with Charles Darwin, who'd helped me quite a lot, and Charles Dickens. And the thing that came into my head was this phrase from Mark Twain: "The 2 most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why." While this sounds incredibly corny, what I've been doing, much like Heather, is starting to bring Simpli5 and 5 Dynamics into a small team in a very, very large organization, right? So Roche and Genentech, 125 and 40 years old, respectively. And at the moment, I'm in a small R&D futurist group. So really trying to just sort of roll this out also in a soft launch mode. Heather's comment resonated a lot because we also blew through our initial pilot license overnight, and we're in year 2 now where word has gotten out, and oh my gosh, is it such an inspiring thing to be onboarding people and doing trainings and certifications and so on and so forth. But the reason I wanted to actually show Mark Twain is this quote, right? And don't worry, I have vetted this phrase at home with my significant other, and she's not too annoyed at me for saying this. If the second most important day of your life is when you find out why you were born, I really and truly believe that the third most important day of your work life, and maybe of your whole life, is the day that you find your energetic preferences. And I think of this not just because of what that helps you do in the moment with this team, with the next project, but really and truly because I think of it as a catalytic moment in your life, right? We may have all had a catalytic moment with something like Myers-Briggs or Leadership Circle Profile or something else 5, 10, or 20 years ago in my case. But oh my gosh, when you get that 5 Dynamics report and you start to understand your energetic preferences and what it means, it is a true unlock. And I think of it as a catalytic and a transformative unlock. And last year in my talk, I talked a lot about how the tool helped me make a really, really big life decision, which turned out to be a very good life decision, and it was a leap of faith decision. And we can talk about that offline or later on if we've time. So it's not just about my connection to the tool that brought me here today to talk to you all, but it's actually seeing it over the past year rolling out inside of our organization, right? I have goosebumps every time somebody reports back for a meeting or an offsite. And just the other week, I had one where a product leader of one of our most advanced, sophisticated products that we're spending an extraordinary amount of sum of money on said to me, you know, we did this, we rolled it out, we kind of got in there, got scrappy with it. And she said, oh my gosh, it helped us get into the heart of a conversation that we've been struggling to have for 2 years, right? You just think about the unlock of energy in that moment. So this is really big stuff. It's not just about describing the preferences and finding more of them, but it's really about that catalytic self-awareness that helps us all get to and perform at the next level. So what am I going to talk about today? So, you know, I really consider myself a toddler, if that's not a weird thing to say. I think of myself as the little kid on the trike with the stabilizers, because the first time I ever used the tool, Heather brought me into it. And then, of course, I used it on and off for a long time at IDEO. And I joined IDEO around the time that Heather would have started to roll out the tool. So it's really an incredible honor to get to build on some of her comments and also to get to enter into dialogue in a few moments with Karen and to spar with you all. What I'd really like to do, though, before we start to talk about how I'm using this with teams in the moment, is actually to really talk about what I'm seeing going on in the world of work right now. And so many of you know that I've spent the last couple of years thinking about the future of work, researching it and prototyping it with organizations. And so as a kind of a backdrop for how teams are working and how we can think about elevating performance and commitment and ultimately impact in our organizations with teams, I wanted to use the first part of my talk to literally talk about how work is working and to give us some vocabulary and provocations around the moment that work is in. So what I'm going to do is walk through a couple of very brief headlines that I've noticed and noted from the past year that I think are relevant for us all in this reframe moment with work. One mental model that I want to introduce to us here is something that I heard on the TV. I heard this on PBS a couple of years ago by a sociologist from Yale. His name is Nicholas Christakis, and he wrote a book called Apollo's Arrow. And what I thought was really, really powerful about this framework is the fact that he talks about the second order consequences, or what he calls the knock-on effects, the knock-on consequences of COVID, right? And I was watching this about 2 years ago in my home during the lockdown. And this sociologist said, you know, the mental model that he was suggesting is that it's going to take us 3 to 5 years to truly understand how humanity has changed and how work has changed because of COVID. And I thought this was such an extraordinary mental model because I was already a fan of second order effects and knock-on consequence thinking. And with the headlines that I'm going to bring into the room today, I really think that we're at a moment where some of these things have started to play out with work and with teams, and some of them we're only really getting a sense of. And so I'll briefly walk through these examples, and then we'll get to the heart of the big idea that Karen and Heather and myself have been noodling on. So what I would say is, whether or not you like or agree with these specific examples, it actually matters less to me than that we try on this as a way of thinking so that we can apply it in our own organizations. Okay, so the first one real quick. This one to me was quite startling because if you think about what many of us experienced, and obviously I'm talking here about mainly office-based workers, many incredible folks came into the office every day or came into facilities or healthcare settings. And so this will not apply to everybody. But for the most part of us, for many of us that were able to do our jobs from home, overnight, we flipped into a mode where we were essentially flattened, or we were very kind of democratized or egalitarianized during COVID, which led us to feel like we were having more connections and building more diverse teams and tapping into more of the energy in our organizations. This was a fascinating piece of highly vetted peer-based research that came out from Microsoft about 2 years into COVID that essentially led them to lead and understand that for many firms, they were collaborating less and they were actually using less of their network and less of their talents and potential 2 to 3 years into COVID. And so this quote is quite startling. Microsoft, obviously a very big technology forward, data forward organization, essentially published this thing in Nature Human Behavior that underscored the point that the shift to digital first and the shift to virtual and hybrid caused business groups in the company to become less interconnected. So I'll leave that with you. I'll let some gears turn, but essentially I'd love you to think about, does this have implications for how you build teams and who we think can do the right work and who can bring the right energy and skills and preferences into our project teams? The second headline I want to talk about is about when work gets done. And the provocation here that I'd like us to think about is the difference between individual and team-based work. And the graphic to focus on here is on the side where we have the two different colors. And if you squint at these graphics, what you'll hopefully start to see is that many individuals are now starting to have a second peak in their day. So if you look at the bottom orange yellow graphic, you'll see a lower dip in the middle of the day. You'll see kind of a second camel peak, and then you'll see this stretch into the evenings. And what the researchers call this is effectively a third peak, where many individuals for various reasons are choosing to either work later, take breaks during the day, or to accommodate their work preferences because of family or caregiving situations. All of these at the face of themselves are essentially very positive things. And many employees actually report higher satisfaction and higher productivity with these changes. But what I hope we might take away from this data is that there may be dynamics that we don't understand that are a little bit different here in terms of factoring how teams can do work and what the balance of individual versus team-based time is, right? How do we understand this? How do we form agreements around when we're going to get to work together? And back to Heather's question about questioning our assumptions about how work gets done. Are there things that we're doing in a group setting that maybe might be better handled in an individual setting and vice versa? So the third peak of work is a really interesting concept. It's also connected to things like meeting creep and scope, which I'll talk about later on, but a very interesting provocation in terms of how our time and energy is working for us. Okay, just a couple more. The next one is probably the counterpoint or cousin of the third peak. And this caught my eye in the New York Times. I don't know if anybody's seen this headline. It was kind of a fascinating headline. Essentially, there was research into things like golf, Pilates and yoga, haircuts, really getting into all kinds of analysis of people spending money in their hometowns and their communities. And there was some kind of crazy statistic, like several 100% rise in golf bookings on a midweek afternoon, right? This research was done by Nicholas Bloom, who I'll talk more about in a second. If you haven't heard Nicholas's name or come across him, he's one of the foremost future of work researchers in the world. He's been working on this for over 20 years, and pre-COVID, he had the gold standard control versus test group study about worker productivity in the virtual and remote setting. And I just thought this was a really fantastic, a sort of a lighter provocation to bring into the room, which is, what's our reaction when we see this headline, right? My reaction was, awesome. People are living their lives. If they can get a golf tee on a Wednesday afternoon that they can't get on a Saturday morning, or tennis, or, you know, if you're struggling to get that haircut, this is actually a really, really fantastic thing. But it also leads us to think about, how is this coordination and choice inside of our organizations, whether they're big organizations or small organizations, how is this working in terms of how we're showing up for each other and how we're making choices about in-person versus hybrid? And so the last provocation from Nick Bloom I'm going to leave you with is this concept of the Nike swoosh. So because Nicholas Bloom has been researching this for decades and decades, he's been able to show and visualize the gains that we've made in moving towards virtual and remote work with our teams. But he's also helping a lot of CEOs and leaders navigate this backlash and pushback to get people into the office. Now, I'm not going to get into that debate because it's a very personal debate. It's a very specific debate for company cultures. But what I thought was really fascinating that Nicholas pointed out in this Economist article is that he essentially thinks that we're at the plateau of this Nike swoosh curve, right? He thinks we've reached maximum pushback toward getting people in. And at this moment in time, he's feeling like the incremental debate in many large organizations about getting people in for that fourth day or that fifth day or on that third day is just not working. And so he points to the fact that once we pass this peak, we may start to go back to more sustained incremental gains in the future of work uptick. And the thing he points to that I'm very excited about is something like over 3,000 patents that have been filed since COVID, thinking about interactive tools, systems, videos. I'm sure our friends at Simpli5 will be experimenting and pulling out cool stuff here too. And he harkens it back to the early days of the phone or the internet, where of course we can see how the internet is changing our lives. Of course we can see that our iPhone or our Android is powerful. But oh my gosh, we don't really have a true sense of what's going to unfold over the next couple of years. So wrapping up this section, you know, these to me all felt like quite powerful things and quite positive things. You know, some of them have mixed sides, but ultimately quite positive. And then about 3 weeks ago, I started to see these headlines, right? And I felt like I had to bring these into the room. And I think this is a fantastic build or provocation to layer in on top of Heather's phrase about scarcity mindset. Essentially, these headlines, if you haven't seen them, are about companies looking at adjusting or cutting their workforce. And they're not even doing it in the ways that we've been used to in the papers in recent years, right? Reductions in forces, things like this are quite common. From what I understand from these articles and from talking to people in my network, there are very confusing things happening where employees are being told that they've maybe their job is not there anymore, or they're going to get reassigned, and they may be getting fundamentally reassigned to something that's just impossible for them to do as a human being, right? So people being called into these meetings, and it's really interesting to me. The reason why I wanted to underscore this is what has happened to mission-based hiring? What has happened to the idea of attracting great people into our organization and having a growth mindset where we think we can grow them and keep them and invest in them, right? And Airbnb was famous a long time ago for doing this mission-based hiring. I understand that every business needs to change, but I wonder if there's more we can do as managers and leaders to have an open mind about what roles are really, truly super specialized and what types of roles is it possible to grow or develop people into. And what is the role of something like natural energetic preferences to help us figure out those skills pathways? So with that, one more piece of data, and then I'm going to go into the last section. And that's around how are we working together? And all of this to me, if you haven't picked up on this yet, is pointing to teams and how we can upgrade, spruce up, and really and truly evolve ourselves into having the best and most world-class teams possible. And this is the last piece of data. And I'm not affiliated with Microsoft, I should just say that. They publish absolutely terrific, fantastic research. They get published in places like Nature, and all of their stuff is very freely available. So that's just why I'm citing them. They're often collaborating with all kinds of people. This is a great graphic for you guys to check out later. I'm happy to give my slides. This is looking at changes over the same couple of years in how people's work is working and how they feel about it. There's a couple of really scary, concerning things as a manager and leader, and frankly, just as a collaborator in the slides. If you look at the very bottom, feelings of social connection to my team, massive decrease during this period. Flip this back up with the very top and look at frequency of scheduled meetings, frequency of notifications, frequency of ad hoc meetings. We're spending more and more and more time together, and we're actually feeling more disconnected, more lonely, more isolated. We're also finding that knowledge flow, despite all of that extra meeting time at the top, has not improved. And we're also finding that awareness of colleagues' work and collaboration has effectively either decreased or remained the same. This is a really, I don't want to depress you guys too much, but this is a really scary data point, right? I look at this and I think, how is my team doing? How am I doing? And it kind of reminds me a bit of seeing my Simpli5 report for the first time, where it's putting a finger on something and naming something that I either didn't know or maybe was a little bit afraid to talk about. So as I was preparing over the last couple of weeks and months with Heather and Karen, this sort of crazy idea popped into our minds. And I know Karen might speak about it a bit more later on. I essentially think about other parts of the world, in the sports world, in the arts world, in politics. Where have people done better? And this concept came into our mind, essentially thinking about what would it look like if we had Moneyball for teams? Now, what we mean by Moneyball, obviously, this takes the frame of reference from Michael Lewis's book, which I think came out about 20 years ago and changed the world. And I'm not a sports person. I'm actually an immigrant to the US, so I'm really, really not a sports person. But what I would say is the concept of Moneyball and the concept of seeing things with fresh eyes, giving language and value to the invisible, what Heather talked about a few minutes ago, this is something that we couldn't unsee when we started to talk about it a couple of minutes ago. And the simplest way that I can explain this is that sports markets to me are like true markets, right? They price in information. They're constantly looking at angles and ways to improve. They're looking at ways to get 1% better. Some of the games that happen at a team level or an industry level are really the sustained efforts of these super incremental things. And so when Michael Lewis wrote this book about what was going on with this manager of a team in Oakland, essentially what he was starting to get at is the opposite of quiet cutting. Right, he was starting to look at what they already had in their teams or organizations and how they could do more with them, and where they could go to find things that other people were looking to create new configurations and new systems of people to do their work. Now, Moneyball, sports analytics, it's an incredibly analytical, detailed thing, right? And so I'm not necessarily sure that we go there right away. I think we should have a more measured, considered approach to the data. And so this graphic on the far side of the screen is really just trying to hit at that idea of what would a more human-centered way to capture what's going on with our teams and on our projects look like. And that's what I'd love us to talk about a little bit in the Q&A together. I have not seen a ton of application of this theory at the team level. And of course, I could be wrong there, and I would love to hear from you all or from folks later if they have. Where I have heard a lot about it is in the hiring process, doing predictive hiring and demand-based hiring. And I think there have been good outcomes and frankly, some mixed outcomes with that. But essentially what I'm advocating for here is Moneyball for teams, thinking about how we can unlock the most impact and the most well-being inside of our organizations using analytics and using systems like Simpli5. So entering the last part of the conversation, what might Moneyball for teams look like? There's a couple of things here that I think are really important. The one I'm going to zero in on is identifying undervalued skills and what we call difference makers. And difference maker is also a concept that I'm borrowing from the sports world, which is essentially the person or energy that when we bring it into a team truly is a game changer in terms of shoring up a gap, amplifying something, often the unsung hero, the underdog, the quiet energy that we actually realize we're missing. There's something really, really powerful that Simpli5 and the 5 Dynamics helps us do, which is not only question our assumptions about who we need on a team, but question the fundamental ways that work gets done. And Heather gave us some great examples and stories of how we move through a program or project cycle, thinking about what we need at every stage. I've used this a lot in my own life in a new job. So when I took this job 2 years ago, it was certainly a growth and stretch moment for me. And one of the things I had to learn to do very quickly was comment on and just be very open and vulnerable about where things were not going to be the best use of my time or energy, right? And in some ways, as a newcomer to the pharma industry and to the digital health industry, I had so much to learn. I had to be very intentional about leaning on the strength of my craft and my systems thinking skills and my strategy thinking skills. And even though at the time it felt very scary and vulnerable, it honestly felt like one of the best things I've ever done. I was forced into a corner. I had to be so open about it. And I'll never forget a conversation where a colleague was asking me to take on a deeply, deeply technical engagement. And it just did not make sense to me. I could see certain craft and practice things where I could for sure move the needle. I could run a facilitated dialogue. I could help as a leader. But there were people on my team that were far, far better placed to help him, because the cost or the trade-off of me working so deeply on this thing would have completely sapped my energy for months on ends, and it wouldn't have led to the outcome that he wanted. And so I think that identifying these undervalued skills and taking this Moneyball approach and mindset is something that we can all start to do tomorrow, next week, using tools like Simpli5. So I'm going to skip through this next part, but I do want to tell you one story as I wrap up, which is something that I came across last week. Many of you might know Claire Hughes-Johnson. She recently stepped down as the Chief Operating Officer of Stripe, an extraordinary woman who scaled up all of Google's consumer operations, really phenomenal leader. And she just published this book with Stripe called Scaling People. And this is a phenomenal workbook, resource guide. It really codifies a whole bunch of best-in-class tools for companies doing people work. And she told a story in it about a colleague called Matt Britton, who's been the general manager and head of Google in the UK and in Europe for a long time. I don't know Matt personally very well. I don't know Claire very well. I have been in their orbit and I've been around them, which was a phenomenal life experience for me 15, 20 years ago. She tells a story of asking Matt about building teams and running high performance teams. And there was a really difficult reorg, the story goes. Nobody really knew how Matt got through it. He did it faster with more high energy. And she pulled him aside, apparently, Claire, and said, Matt, how did that happen? And he said, look, I was a competitive rower in high school and in college, and he actually was in the Olympics, this guy, very, very humble guy. And he said, look, I really think the single biggest thing I learned in my life was as a rower. When I was rowing back in the day, I would just think about who I needed in the boat, who was going to be the coxswain, who was off the field with the rowers. And he said, I never had any assumption. I just looked around and tried things and thought about how to get the best people in my boat. And even as the person running Google in Europe, he didn't care about hierarchy and level and all of these things that people worry about. Is this person a director or are they not? So he just said, I tried to figure out how to get the best people in the boat. And then I truly made them feel like they were in the boat, regardless of how long they were going to be there for or what their title or level was. And I just thought this was such a disarmingly simple story. Who's in your boat? How do you get the right people in the boat? And how can you use things like energetic preferences to get people in the boat and keep them there? That is something extremely practical and tangible that I think we can all do. So wrapping up, let's just go back to the very start, back to Mark Twain. When I was also looking up the quote for slide 1, because I wanted to get it accurate for you guys, I also found this quote. Again, quite corny, quite trite. But essentially what I really believe is that if you find your energetic preferences and you help more people find them, you really won't feel like work is as worky as it has been. Work will continue to be in a very dynamic moment. We need to think like designers. We need to think about policymakers. We need to navigate these trends for each other. And I really think that if you can find the right people, put them in the boat, try on Moneyball as a concept. And for me, really, at the end of the day, it's all about the energetic preferences. Thank you so much, and I'm really looking forward to the dialogue and Q&A.
Thank you, Susan. That was wonderful, thought-provoking as always. Well, I have a few questions that I'd like to start off with you and Heather here. Hey, there's Heather. And then I'll open it up to the audience, and I'm sure that they have some wonderful questions as well. So my first question is, we're often asked about how we're different from other methodologies out there. And Susan, I recall the first time that you and I ever spoke, you made the comment that you've used every methodology out there and you'll never use anything else again. Well, of course, my first thought is I love you. My second thought is, I'd love to use this on our website. But what I really want to know is, can you share with us why you felt so strongly about that? In your words, what makes our methodology unique?
So where the comment came from, which I still believe is completely true, is for me, it maps to the modern cycle of project work. And I'm obviously, I know many people use it in many different contexts, right? In service industries and healthcare, but essentially for me doing either project-based innovation work, strategy work, and trying to bring teams of people together at every level in the organization. The simplest thing I can say is it just out of the box has almost a one-to-one mapping to me to the kind of work we do. And I think it's probably no coincidence that Heather and I are both here and that I got to work with and learn from her at IDEO. So many companies and teams are trying to do this type of project-based innovation work, but they actually don't, they're kind of missing some of the really basic things, like why a project-based structure, we should design the work before we do the work, et cetera. So this could get very dorky and very wonky. I'll pause there for a second, Heather, but essentially to me, it is quite simply the best tool that maps to how the work should be happening and be done. And the talk from last year, we had all kinds of diagrams and mappings and things like that got quite detailed. But at a high level, that's the most simple, profound thing I can say, which I still believe even more than I did, a year or two ago when I first met you.
The second question here is for Heather. You've successfully implemented these large-scale rollouts of Simpli5 into very different organizations. And I'm hoping that you can share, and I know you did some of this in your presentation, but definitely would love for you to kind of expand on that with the audience. Are there any must-dos and must-not-dos when introducing this methodology to others?
Absolutely. And I think it builds on a comment that Susan made in her presentation, that we need to be thinking like designers. What you must do first is know your users. You cannot just say, oh, got a great new tool. Now everyone's going to use it in the same way. You have to understand, what is this tool actually going to serve? What are the needs that you are solving for? And ideally, that's where a business need intersects with a people need. And when you're able to bring those things together, a tool like this can really be catalytic. I know we use that word a lot. I think Susan and I share a lot of mental mindsets when it comes to doing this people work. And that word catalytic is so important because all day long, we're building engines. We are building functions, we are building processes, we are setting strategy and making decisions that are fundamentally people-centered. Because if they're not, nothing is going to work. So first, know your user, understand the need that you're solving for, and then, like I shared, launch to learn. Have a little humility around it, because you will always be surprised.
Yeah.
I often say that we suffer from having such immense impact in the first 3 minutes. And what I mean by that is that people get so excited about their individual results and the reports that come along around pairs and teams that they assume that's it. That's the total value. And the initial response is always positive because people love learning about themselves and others. But to me, they miss that most powerful part, which is using the methodology to get work done with higher engagement and higher productivity. And we all know that this is just the tip of the iceberg. So what do you think, either Susan or Heather or both, is necessary for others to recognize the value that they're leaving on the table by not building this methodology into other applications like change management or onboarding or career development, as we heard from Kevin yesterday. So how do we shift that perception?
Do you want to start, Susan? Because I know you have some ideas there.
Well, I have two, and one is so this past year was the first time I really used it in development conversations and around performance, like growth edges where we wanted to go. And I really, Karen knows this. I actually was using Speechify. I was kind of internalizing this on walks and doing more like blue sky thinking about my colleagues and my team. So reading it multiple times, having a robot read it to me. I know that sounds weird, but I'm kind of playing with being an augmented manager. And so both myself and my employees really internalized it and used it as a language in our development conversations, which was really powerful. So that was a fantastic edge. I'm going to continue doing that this year, and it felt like a really big unlock. The second one I would say is when we get together as leadership teams or as communities, I don't think we're often stepping back enough to talk about our org structure, literally how we're working in service of our mission, right? So the phrase servant leadership, which is probably is a problematic phrase now. A lot of people have these inverted org charts, upside down org charts where they have, customers. If we were in healthcare, it might be patients or systems. And we really, if you really kind of step back and talk about how are we working and what may have not been questioned in a while. Are there wrong defaults about teams, about energy, about meetings, right? So Peter Drucker has an old famous one about auditing your calendar. Like I'm really passionate about offsites, and we kind of joke that longer term, maybe that's what I should be just doing, is like running people's offsites. But stepping back and saying, like, how have we been spending our time and energy, and what are we talking about and not talking about? I think there's much more of an interesting place that Simpli5 could play there. And I don't mean that you actually have to do a reorg overnight, right? Some of that execute energy can be a bit high when we're actually supposed to be exciting or exploring each other or examining, frankly. And so I would be very interested to work with my own executive team, other teams, to look at things like our mission, our customers, and our impact. And then just say, like, the question I would ask is, like, do we have some wrong defaults?
I really like that. And maybe to build on it a little bit, one of the things that we have to remember as practitioners or deciders, whatever the case may be, in this intimate little digital room we're all in together today, is that the tool is beautifully simple. And it allows you the ability to test, to try, to prototype, to tinker. As I said, it is not a massive organizational investment in terms of finding some places to, bring the tool in to maybe unlock something that had been all jammed up before. The barrier to exploration is low. And one of the things that I think we can get very stymied by is when there's established organizational value, we just focus on that. There's a use case, right? We know what this is good for, so we just double down on this is something, for onboarding, right? When no, we need to be much more creative in our thinking. We need to be much more abundant in our thinking. To Susan's point, find these organizational pinch points where find out, go, do a little test, have a conversation between two people using the tool to see what it might further. And I think that builds your own confidence as a practitioner, but it also builds organizational confidence for, okay, we can use tools like this, we can use thinking like this and methods like this, and it's actually progressing us.
Yeah. Karen, may I chip in one quick build there? So it was really fun for me to roll this out with a small team doing, very progressive work, and very different from IDEO, right? Even though it's the same type of work. And the two things that I felt so strongly, one were, once we have a minimum buy-in and a commitment, right? It's sort of like, what's the currency? Once people elect to use the tool and they understand that they're going to be on the system, that alone as a base case is a big deal. And doing that with psychological safety and care and compassion, and Heather'd be the expert there, right? Like, really making sure people are okay with it. And then honestly, I was a little bit more playful with it. Like, the first time I did a group simulation, we'd only barely gotten on the system. The team were incredible with helping us get on there. And we actually had people print out their maps and stick them on their sweaters, right? And this was still in a COVID environment, so we had masks and so on and so forth. And I was just kind of making this up on the fly. I said, go find someone who looks like you. This was a 60-person department of extremely technical people, world-class data scientists, algorithm builders. And they just walked around and eyeballed each other, and you could hear them cooing and laughing and oh and ooh and ah. And it was such a profound thing to give them because they were super into the tool. And then we had them find somebody that was very different from them and talk about it. And then we had them configure in their teams. And there were some teams where there were basically 5 of the same set of preferences together. And you can imagine the insights they were having. So even though we have fantastic trainings and resources, which we will continue to use, I also kind of unburdened it a bit and just sort of let people kind of come up with the two, only a few little guardrails. And that actually led to some really organic, cool findings in the past year.
Great. I want to get to other people's questions. I just have one more. And Susan, I kind of keyed in on when you showed the graphic around the number of meetings that are taking place and how that's just really gotten out of whack, in my opinion. And so to me, I've been a virtual leader for 24 years. So, I think that it's lack of discipline and lack of structure. It's too easy to just pop in, to send an email. If you don't get an immediate response, Slack them. If you don't get an immediate response, text them. And it's like, no, you have to be more disciplined and more structured about the way that you're going to communicate and when. So impromptu meetings may occasionally be necessary, but they shouldn't be the norm. That's my opinion. But I'm curious to hear from the two of you, what you think that we can do better so we can reduce that number of times when we're in meetings, because there's a huge amount of wasted hours of time, and we're inviting the wrong people to the meeting, people that don't need to be there, people that can be copied. Could you send an email? But anyway, I'll be quiet and let you talk. I'm very passionate about this particular topic.
It's a really good topic. And Susan, yes, those data were terrifying, absolutely terrifying, and so important. I mean, all of us are experiencing this ourselves too, aren't we? You know, and it's probably not going to surprise any of you that I immediately want us to tap into empathy, because there are the things that are happening in those meetings, and then there's everything else that is happening off screen, you know, outside the parameters of that little box that we are so often in. And what's going on out there is just as frenetic, high stakes, complicated, you know, time sensitive as everything that's going on at work. And so even just being able to start from a place of humanity, who is the person that I am talking to today? What's up with them? What might be going on? Even just to ask yourself the very question, okay, before I jump into, you know, Slack and send a whole bunch of messages or pull out my phone, what might be happening for them before I go forward? And honestly, that's the type of stuff that we just don't do. You know, we're much too, I don't know, solutions execution forward, where we don't realize that to be solutions and execution forward, right? We got to back up in that sequence. And so it sounds almost silly in a way, you know, or like, I don't know, just like, wouldn't that be lovely if we all had time to have empathy for people? But honestly, if you're going to tie it to the research, like let's listen to Kahneman and the absolute necessity of going slow to go fast. If you want to be able to have the beneficial results, you've got to back up a little bit. It's wasted effort, energy, and angst to just rush into, you know, being overly communicative without considering the person.
Right. You know, one of the things that we build into our meetings too, I'm a stickler on both of these things. One is that we allow a couple of minutes at the beginning of every meeting for people to be human, to bring their messiness, because, you know, they have things going on. They maybe had a crying baby they were dealing with. They maybe just had a husband or a wife who was in a car accident. I mean, there are all sorts of things. And so we just allow everyone just a moment to become present and focused by allowing them to kind of get those things out if they want to share those with others. And then the second thing is, and Heather, I'm sure you do this because Anise Kavanaugh is another great friend of ours and she has some wonderful ideas, but we don't book our meetings for a full 30 minutes or a full 60 minutes. We always do 25 and 50, unless a customer, of course, is initiating the meeting and they've requested the full 60, because otherwise you're just setting yourself up for that day to just be running with your hair on fire all day long, and things back up and you get behind. And so, you know, those are just a couple of disciplines that we've attempted that seem to be working. So
I have a thought on the meetings, Karen, if it's okay to chime in. So I think for me, this will sound crazy, but just bear with me for 10 seconds. I would kind of love to like redesign this or revisit as a team, and I would actually ban us using the word meeting, right, for a week or a month, to say, what is it? Is it a check-in? Is it a status update? Is it a community session? Is it a working session? And there's two reasons that I would say this. One is, when we went through COVID, right, and I was able to do future of work research for a number of amazing high-performing teams during COVID, which was one of the true honors of my life, everything just flipped onto video, right? And so this thing got better in a really interesting, different way, which is we just assumed that all the stuff we were doing here in person, which we were sometimes doing in video, we were now just going to do on video. And I remember about 18 months into COVID, I visited one of our incredible colleagues at IDEO. He was an interaction designer, filmmaker, storyteller, so a very different type of colleague than me. And we were vaccinated. We were in his house. I was dropping off a piece of equipment. And he had his screen on his kitchen table, and he had a gaming headset. And he had one of his colleagues off video and two of his colleagues on video. And they would come in, right, when they were working on something for a client. They would be working together with their headsets or with their speakers, or they'd have music on or the radio on. They were together in a virtual space because they were building a prototype or they were building a piece of code, right? Now, would you call that a meeting? Right? Kind of wasn't really a meeting. It was a working session. And they were actually, you know, if you looked at their calendar, it looked like a 3-hour block. It looked super annoying. They were kind of living their best life, where they knew each other and you know, they were different and they had things in common, but they'd figured out an incredible way to make this delightful and work for them. And every so often they would hop on a meeting that we would consider like an executive meeting or with a client, but they had made it work for them, right? Think about how many of your meetings or our meetings or workshops or things like like we need to just question our defaults. And we're also not used to or able to concentrate. The really, really sad thing is we're so fried from the status updates or the transactional meetings that when I see us getting on a meeting where we want to concentrate or collaborate, we literally would need to take a half day off to be able to even, I mean, I'm just going to be a bit extreme here, but like to be able to get into that headspace is so rare, right? And that's why offsites, longer meeting blocks. So video on, video off, the phone, there's so many interesting modalities. I would love to really like geek out with anyone that wants to talk about this, because we don't have to go crazy. We can pick one thing and experiment with it. And this is such an important thing in the future of work. This is more important than any patents or tools that come around, which is being reflective and understanding our meeting energies and our energy preferences.
Yeah. Excellent. Yep. Yeah, I mean, some of you are maybe aware, some might not, that we actually developed some meeting software that looked at kind of who's in a meeting and how they'll show up. But the piece that we prototyped that we haven't done yet is to do exactly what you're saying, Susan, which is to qualify what is this meeting for, what's the purpose, and by the way, what are the predominant energies that are going to be required in this particular meeting. So we took it a step further there. Well, I promise I get to other people's questions. So I have one here for Heather. If empathy is lacking in an organization or culture, how would you recommend trying to change that?
Oh, it's such a good question. And I feel so much of what's embedded in it too, because that is not unique. Empathy is not something that most organizations are talking about, or if they are, it is in a wildly performative way. They don't even understand what the word actually means. So I think there are some tangible nuts and bolts things. The first is modeling it. You know, just being able to offer empathy can be contagious. When you offer it to others, it feels so good that people will share it with others themselves. So there are some like genuine ripple effects that can happen. I love Susan's invitation to think about what are the like little things that we can do, right? Like it's not about changing everything. It's not about massive investment. What are some of the bits and pieces? Another bigger piece in embedding empathy in any organization is you've got to take a cold, hard stare at your systems, your processes, your tools, and your methods, and see which of them either support empathy or completely obliterate it, because you will find versions of both. And if you are in a position where you can try to tweak, change, or completely, jettison others, you should be actively striving to do so. We need to be very active in the hygiene of empathy and looking at these more systemic component parts to make sure that they're there to support the behaviors, the values, the actions that we want to see, and they're not actively working upon our people in a way that is going to make it impossible to be empathetic.
Thank you. So here's one for Susan. It's from another individual from Stanford. Susan, I know that you consult to people at Stanford. It's Ade. And so Ade has asked, just to have you speculate, what will you do differently if you have to introduce 5 dynamics into a German firm, and why?
That's fun. I'll be down at Stanford tomorrow, and ich könnte die Frage eigentlich auf Deutsch mal antworten, wenn Sie das möchten. So I have a lot of experience living and working in Germany. Sorry, all I said was I could maybe answer your question in Germany, Ade. I'm going to really generalize here, but my honest reaction is process workflow. I'm really stereotyping, but many Northern European and German companies love workflow process, high clarity organizations. And so, and I'd be happy to follow up with you offline. We have a lot of great, in my current world, in my old world, there's a lot of design flow diagrams, whether it's the double diamond or the typical IDOD school type process. So I would actually overlay that with Simpli5, with phases of work, choices of work, and think about not just energetic preferences, but team building. So I think you've got what you need, then you've got energetic preferences. And so I would kind of mash up process or flow diagrams of the job to be done, would be my quick headline. And the more nuanced point I'll keep short is, to me, when projects switch state, or is it a project, is it a program, or is it an ongoing work area? Like, are we literally going to be doing this for years? When you change the state, when you mix up the team, augment the team, or what does the team sign up for? That's a super interesting thing where I think not more than, honestly, 10, 12 weeks, maybe even 6, 8 weeks. You want to be constantly adapting and looking at how it's doing. And this is where Moneyball comes in. So I think if this German firm were super into clarity, process, rigor, I would kind of almost like have a framework festival with them and pick one, right? Look at a couple, pick one. And then service design here is your friend. I've done a lot of work recently on service design for leadership and events and experiences, and it's totally underrated, right? We're used to it at airports or fancy hotels, but like, man, everything in your life can benefit from service design. And I'd be happy to geek out about that if you like. It's a kind of a thing you can just do once, and you'll get a lot of bounce out of it, I think. Great question.
Thank you.
I know we could go all day. There's so many questions, but I know that I'm cutting into Tyler's time now into his schedule. So I would just say that if there are other questions, please continue to ask them. We have a spreadsheet where we capture that. And even if they're not able to answer during this conversation, I'll certainly feel free to share those with Heather and Susan and get back to you on those answers. So thank you, and sorry, Tyler, but it was great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, all good. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Susan. And Susan, your rowing analogy resonates with me, being a former collegiate rower. And at one of my stories that taught me about teamwork was when you actually hit the set. I was in an 8-man boat. You hear bubbles under the boat. And it's one of those kind of euphoric, like, you hit the set when that kind of happens. And for me, that's kind of carried into my philosophy as a team leader and as people leader, trying to get that perfect set with a whole crew of different people, right? Obviously, rowing is a bit more physical than it is mental, although there's plenty of things around that. But really appreciate your insights, your stories, and your advocacy. I think clearly you've been doing a lot of things right. And again, I'm honored to have both of you here to participate. And I think the word that, again, if you were watching the chat, practice. Practice is, there's no start and stop. Practice is ongoing and continuous. And I think that is something that we definitely internalize. I know I do. I know Karen, the whole Simpli5 team, and hopefully our larger Simpli5 community that also resonates. So pivoting to kind of what's up next. So we're going to actually be taking a 10-minute break. And then that's going to be followed directly by a 15-minute networking session. So 25 minutes in total. For the things that'll happen outside of the main stage. So just some quick traffic air controller where you're going to go. So as you exit the main stage, there's a tile right in the virtual event lobby that says connect with your Simpli5 community. And what you'll have a chance to do, whether that's if you want to go straight there or take a quick break and stretch, we'll be placing trios into virtual breakout rooms that'll all be anonymous. We have some conversation starters, really more around kind of past, present, and future, just in terms of kind of their inspiration. And hopefully this is a chance to meet a new friend, hear a new story, and most likely have some fun. So that's yesterday. But after the networking session, we'll come back to the main stage. So you have to enter back in through that tile. And we'll move into our next moderated Q&A with Diego, who's going to kind of do a deep dive on how 5 Dynamics shows up in the educational space. So have fun, make a new friend, and we'll see you shortly. Welcome back, and hopefully everyone had a chance to make some new connections, swap some stories, or learn something interesting. So for our next session, I'll be moderating a Q&A with our next speaker, who I'm excited to welcome to the main stage. Diego James Navarro, Professor Emeritus at Cabrillo College and the founder of the Academy for College Excellence, (ACE), has been working in the education space for 30+ years and designed the program Guided Pathways, a proven student onboarding strategy and experience that instills cultures of dignity and belonging in students that has statistically proven to move the needle on a number of meaningful metrics. So Diego, thank you for joining us today, and excited to get into discussing some questions. So in addition to introducing yourself, the first, I think, question that we had talked about was, what was the problem you were trying to solve? Or what was the problem that you saw in kind of higher education? So welcome to our summit, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Tyler. I very much appreciate this invitation from Karen and yourself to speak here. I've been working with Simpli5 your technology and your technology for a long time, since 2000. So it's been really wonderful to be here. I just want to mention this background is it was in Southeast Asia. I was just in Indonesia for snorkeling, and I've been gone for a month. So sorry I came in 5 minutes beforehand because I'm still in jet lag mode. Well, to answer your question, the problem I was trying to solve, let me have a student tell you a little about it, because I can show you have a video, just a very short thing. Student named Anna, who came over the border in, I don't know, it was she was in my second cohort, the spring of 2004. And I'm here in Santa Cruz, California, and in what's called South County is Watts. And there are students that were disconnected from education, or not students, there were individuals between 18 and 26 that were disconnected from education, from employment, and from other issues like that. And the city manager of Watsonville came to Cabrillo College and asked if there was anything we could do to help support this need they had. And so coming from HP Labs and having a research background, I went and interviewed 120 people in the first 2 months just to try to figure out what was going on there and nationally regarding this type of issue. And so the student I'm going to introduce you to, Anna, was a kind of a typical student that I was working with. And I met Anna when she was at the adult school, which I found to be the best recruiting place for students that really wanted to change their lives. And she was in a course learning computer skills. And she was 26 years old. And I came to this course to recruit students. And the teacher said, you need to talk to this student, Anna. She's pretty amazing. So I went and I talked to Anna. And invited her to a orientation, because my first semester, I was towards the end of the first semester of teaching this program we set up. And she said, Diego, I can't go to Cabrillo. And I was going, well, why not? And so then she told me a little bit about her story. And she was 26 at the time, had 4 children. But when she was when she came across the border, she was like 11 years old, and with her mother and her sister through Arizona, and they ended up in Southern California. And within a year, they felt the Migra was coming after them, the immigration group. And so they moved to Watsonville. And so a year later, she had her 8th grade graduation at this huge celebration, because she's the first person in her family to graduate from 8th grade. And then a year later, they had a quinceañera, which is a rites of passage for Latino and Hispanic young people, women. And but when she was at her quinceañera, right afterwards, she found out that she was pregnant. And she dropped out of school, started working. And by the time that I met her, she had 4 children and been working 2 jobs for all those years, 11 years, and was burnt out and was trying to find something to change her life so that she could be with her children and not have to work all the time. And one thing I found out about her and other students I work with is they don't know their strengths. They don't know their strengths. You know, they think they're one thing because society or their family or their experiences have told them that they're one way. So I invited her to come and talk, and she said, I can't do that. And but she came with her friend Rosalba, who was in her class as well. And she said, you know, I can't go to Cabrillo College because I never went to high school. And I said, don't worry about high school. You know, I have students that didn't go to high school that are in my program right now, because I was towards the end of my first semester. And so let's hear what she has to say a little bit about what her life and experience is like. And let me find the. Now the trick, here it is. I'm not going to go through all these slides, so don't worry about that. They're just
No
backups. When I talk about numbers and results and stuff, it's important to have graphs. So this is Anna, and this is her talking a little bit about her experience.
I I learned about myself. I learned what to expect from me. What else could I do to get my kids out from the hole I was? And I said, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this. I can make it. I know I can.
You know, what I found over the years is that our students have a strength in persistence and a strength in survival. You know, they come to a community college going through really difficult situations in their lives, things that I wouldn't want my children to go through, and things that I went through. I grew up in a tough neighborhood and my mother died when I was 15. So I kind of have the background of what these students bring, and they have a strength in survival and resilience, and they don't know it. And they're very smart, really smart. And so what she wanted to do was something for her kids. And you know what happened to her after that? Never went to high school, went through our program, was 1 semester long. And she was an honor student coming out of our program. And of course, everybody would say, yes, you know, she's in your program, you're all going to grade her well. But then she did all of her prerequisites for the nursing program. So that's 2 years of science, college level science. She stayed an honor student the whole time, went into the nursing program, became a nurse. You know, so here's a student never went to high school. And so how do you help a student who has strengths in persistence and survival? How do you help them shift from who they think they are to who they really are? And I think that the Simpli5, I'll call it technology. I'm not exactly sure what you call it. But the Simpli5 technology is crucial in making that transition for the students. And so what we're doing in the beginning of my program, and this is the end of my answer to your first question, so you're not too worried about. So let me share the screen again. There's so in the community college space, what we're realizing is that you have to deal with onboarding, and what we call onboarding. So you have students that are coming to the college. Many of them were not successful in college. I'm not successful in high school. So they see themselves coming to college. They don't know, you know, who they are, what they're about. Students that are not only 18 years old coming out of high school and didn't do well in high school, but those that are much older that dropped out or whatever their life experience led them to be. And so what the Community College Research Center at Columbia University has found is that there's 4 things you need to do. Is you need to connect with them, you need to find out where they want to go, to inspire them and plan. But the problem with this model is that they're trying to figure out how to inspire. And so they bring me in when Davis Jenkins does his talks and stuff, because what I focus on is inspire. So the thing that my research has been focused on is really inspiring students. And so that's what I'll talk a little bit about, is that experience of what we do and how Simpli5 helps us with that.
Well, I know when we were talking over the summer, kind of leading up to this, you know, I went to a 4-year university. It was a small liberal arts college. They had a week-long program, but not every institution has that, or they have different flavors of it, or it's all outdoors and fun and more peer and connection related than it is potentially about giving me the skills and the lens. And I think a narrative and a theme that you've heard from your years of experience and interaction with 5 Dynamics and Simpli5, but also something that's come from our other speakers, is that it really provides a mirror, first off, right? Understanding yourself, and then kind of taking the mirror down and you see your peers or your coworkers in a completely different way. So for those first semester students, how was 5 Dynamics incorporated into that experience? And what were some of those epiphanies and aha moments that you saw with the students?
Good question. What I found is that students didn't know who they were. So that fundamentally that was the issue that I was trying to address. And I was working with Michael Sturm, who is the inventor of 5 Dynamics, the founder of the company. And what I was finding is that I needed to help the students light a fire inside of themselves. And I wasn't sure how to do that. And what was going on at this time in the community college space was that they were trying to figure out how to deal with the 60% of students that drop out from the first year to second year. So 60% attrition rate, that's pretty high.
Yeah.
And for those that were not prepared for college, if they were not prepared for college in math, only 15% ever made it out of developmental math. And in English, it was 33%. So the numbers were really bad. And so the big focus at that point was on on math acceleration and English acceleration. And what I did was I focused on a different problem. I didn't think the problem was math and English. I don't think it was about learning. It was about who they were, about how they could see their own strengths. So I went looking for a styles indicator, because when I was at Hewlett Packard and you moved up in management, they'd have you take this course, and the course had a 360-degree assessment that your peers did, and then they would tell you kind of these 4 styles. And I was like, oh, interesting. But with Michael, I was saying, Michael, I came out of graduate school, went to Harvard Business School, and I was an expert in teams. And I was going, I want something that ties to teams and team development. And so he laid this out for me and talked about the success satisfaction cycle. I went, exactly, that's what we need. And I was really glad to hear that he used, Gestalt theory to deal with this stuff, to actually unlock kind of the issue that we needed to unlock here. And so the thing was like, how do I take a student through an experience so they can discover themselves? And I wanted it to be a rites of passage, because if you design education around rites of passage, it has a much more powerful sticking capability. And I'll go into some independent research studies that have been done about the program. And so what we did was, I did 5 pilots over a year and a half. I had enough funding from the Hewlett Foundation and the James Irvine Foundation. And I did 5 pilots, of which 2 of the 5 were using the 5 dynamics technology. And what we were trying to do is, could we light a fire inside of students? And my hypothesis was that we could light a fire in these very colorful, high-risk students in 3 weeks. I had experience doing it in 1 week when I was in my 20s in a different type of environment. And I thought, it'll take 3 weeks. And so we would do these 1-week pilots, and at the end of the pilots, everybody would light up. And the approach that we took with 5 dynamics approach was to have the students learn how to see the styles of other people. And we did it through movies, outside speakers, and they would, from seeing, then we'd have them say, who are you? And so then they would use the rubric we had, and they would say who they were. So we had a conscious picture of who they thought they were after 2.5 days. And but we also did the assessment beforehand, and then we overlaid them in a spider diagram, and you would start to see the difference, between them. And so then the students would go into a self-discovery mode, like, oh, this computer program says I'm like this, and I think I'm like that, but who am I? And so it would be a self-discovery piece that would happen. And not only that, they would also see the styles of other people, and they would know what the strengths were of those individuals. And then we did some team communication performance stuff the second half of the first week, and that augmented their abilities as leaders. So what I was doing is training them as leaders in a way that they wouldn't get in any college environment. I didn't get that at Harvard Business School at all. And you're able to know the strengths of the individuals, their gifts, and where they fit into a process that you're working on, whatever it may be, because we go through this 4-stage process. Yeah, so that's what we do, is focus on getting to know themselves.
Well, I think one of the interesting things, and again, something that Karen and I instantly connected on, and I even recall back to one of my initial conversations with her, I was effectively describing my own collegiate experience. And while my energetic kind of profile is excite plus and execute plus, so a college experience for me was all about the people, because that's just kind of how I'm oriented. Not everybody is that way, but I have a lot of friends that went through their 20s, were MDs, lawyers, and now all of a sudden they're completely different trajectories. And not to say that that wasn't their predestined life experience because of those external factors. Their parents were telling them one thing, their friends were telling them the other. But boy, if I would have known a little bit more about myself early on when I was kind of ready for it, what would that have done to my 20s? And I'm sure for everybody on the phone, there's a similar, like, if I only knew now what I knew, kind of that, that whole kind of saying. I think that we may have had different choices, or it might have avoided some of those catastrophic, stressed out, I can't do it, I don't like it moments, where some of those epiphanies are born from. But if you can avoid some of that, to me, that was always kind of the plain chestnut checkers. So as you had students go through this program, what were some of the results? What were the impacts beyond the right in the moment, wow, this is me, I didn't know this was me. But where did you kind of start to see traction?
Well, that's another good question. Well, I want to go back to what you were saying earlier about, you had this 1 week, when you started college.
Mhm.
And, my daughter went to Swarthmore. They had a 2-week program and my
Yeah.
son, he did his graduate work at Stanford. They had an orientation that was several weeks long. And
Mhm.
community college, you know what they do? You go to an orientation for an hour or two and they show you where the bathrooms are and they show you where the library is,
Yeah.
and that's what the orientation is. And then they moved from that to an online orientation, and that was the orientation. And here you have very high risk students trying to change their lives and their image of who they are, and they're giving them, an online orientation. So, I think that the whole issue is, how do you take them through a deep experience so that they get to know themselves? And I keep looking to the right because I have an iPad here that I'm looking at my notes, and it keeps going off because it has 10% left in the battery. That might tell you a little bit about what my styles are. So let me answer your question about the results. So what I started to see was that students were shifting, and they were doing well in the classroom, and they were doing well with, I had English faculty, I had faculty that were doing science with them and so forth. But the faculty at the end of the semester would go, oh my God, these students aren't, they're not going to make it, or they're going to cause havoc in the other classes, because we create a deep family connection. And so students are acting out a lot of their wounds and stuff. It's kind of like a family over that semester. But what the faculty, they were comparing with the regular classes that they had where the students really didn't know each other, and where this community, they really got to know each other. So what I did was what I started to see was that the students were changing, and that something fundamental was happening. So the National Science Foundation funded research in this area, and for my first cohort. And so they did a longitudinal study and found that our students had a huge difference in their grades. And so then that led the Hewlett Foundation and Irvine Foundation to say, we need to get a really in-depth study done. And so that's when we brought in the Community College Research Center from Columbia University. And they did our first study. And what they found in the study, and I forgot what the control was, like 20,000 students or something like that. And it was a regression analysis that they did in that one. And that study showed that our students had 132% difference than the control group in passing transfer level math or English after they came out of our semester. Now, let me tell you, 132% difference. At that time, people salvated over 8%. So they salvated over 8%. However, I'd been doing one cohort a semester for the 5 years that they were looking at, or the 4 years they were looking at. So the issue that they found was that we only had an N of 60. So he couldn't publish the study because the N was too small. However, the Gates Foundation got a hold of that study, and they were looking at 8%. And they were going, look at this thing, and this is done by CCRC. So then they funded us multi-million-dollar, multi-year grant to scale this work at other colleges around the country, and then do an in-depth study. So the study I'm going to share with you right now is a study that was done that followed the Community College Research Center study. That the methodology they used was what's called quasi-experimental design. It's what's known as propensity score match comparison groups, if you're familiar with that at all. And so in this study, what they found, it was 1,000 students. So the N was a good N. It was at 4 colleges. It was a very high risk group in the sense of how they measure risk. Underrepresented groups was almost 80%. A lot of males in the program, which is a very risky a group that doesn't do well usually. And you'll see how many levels below English that they were in. 48% were 2 levels or more below in college level English, and 42% were 1 level or below. So you're talking about over 90% of them, and almost 90% of them assessed 2 or more levels below in college math. Almost 26% were high school dropouts. So I mean, this is a very colorful, what I would call a colorful group. The mean age was 24. But what the slides are showing you, which you're not going to be able to read, but I'll share with you. The reason why this study was so important is that marginalized students outperform their peers significantly when a program focuses on creating belonging, trust, deep bonding, leverages their strengths, and helps them find themselves. So I wasn't focused on math. I wasn't focused on English. I just made sure they placed them 1 level below, so that whatever the students did, no matter where they assessed, they would be able to go into college level English. So this 1,000 student study was done. And what they found is that in English, there was 128% difference than the control group. So here we have scaled the program, 1,000 students. When Davis Jenkins did the study, it was 132%. It it was 128% after we scaled it. And
Hmm.
one of the reasons why we're able to get the numbers is that we have what's called an integrity model. So we understand kind of what the levers are, that if you get them right, you'll get the results that you need. And one of the levers is this 1 week experience. And in order to train faculty to go through that, to teach that experience, they have to go through it themselves. So I have a lot of data now of faculty, over 2,000 faculty that have gone through it, and their assessments are more skewed in terms of their understanding of their strengths. And then what the computer assessment says is more different than what my at-risk students are like. So it's very interesting. They go through the same experience. And I did it twice this summer, once at Cal State Los Angeles with a group of faculty and the other one in Syracuse, New York. Now in math, this study also did math acceleration. And what we found was that there was over a 300% difference in passing transfer level math over the control group, and passing both transfer level math and transfer level English 1 semester afterwards, it was over a 600% difference. So changing the student's sense of self and helping them get in touch with their strengths and abilities outperforms trying to just focus on math or focus on English acceleration.
So I'm curious, Diego, with such a focus on the individual first and kind of building their self-awareness, do you feel like that then translated to, if a student is more confident, they'll be, with themselves and kind of an understanding of themselves, that they'll be more successful with whatever's in front of them, a small obstacle, a big obstacle, whether that's learning, whether that's anything else. But it seems like self-confidence, which again is a positive outcome of that, seems like that's a common denominator, that if a student can capture that, then it's kind of like batter up, right? Anything that comes at them, they'll be more agile and flexible and navigating a path through that.
In this area of academic research, they don't call it self-confidence, they call it self-efficacy. And it's based on Al Bandura's work at Stanford on social learning theory. And so if you can help students shift their self-efficacy, you can actually change their lives. And what we found in this work is that we can actually do that. And let me share with you another study that was done. So this was part of the Gates Foundation study, but I was interested in looking at the academic outcomes. But more than that, I felt that, the research shows that self-efficacy, if you're high in self-efficacy, you do well. But there isn't research that shows you that you can change people's self-efficacy. So what we wanted to do was to show, do things change and how fast do they change? Because with the types of students I was working with, and mind you, what I was trying to do was show that education can be used as an alternative to prisons. That education was the right thing, because I recruited at residential drug treatment programs. I had probation officers, parole officers. I mean, the students I worked with were very, very colorful, and we were having these types of results with them. And so what I wanted to look at was, how fast can you make the change and does it stick? Well, we know it's stuck because you could look at the outcomes of the academic performance. And I'll show you later, we did a capstone study, a 6-year longitudinal study looking at academic and salary outcomes. And I'll share with you that information as well. That was funded by the Jayce Foundation. But this study was showing what changed inside the students. Can you actually measure that? And what would it look like? And so I was working with Martin Chemers at University of California, Santa Cruz. And what he and my team, and then the team over at MPR Associates in Berkeley did was we developed an instrument that was based on instruments that were already proven to be effective in measuring self-efficacy. And I'll share with you what the types of things that we were measuring. And so this study looked at college identity, which was another factor that showed correlation to students being successful in college, academic self-efficacy and hope, mindfulness. We looked at 4 mindfulness constructs. And the reason why we looked at mindfulness is that if you look at prefrontal lobe research, it shows that mindfulness is very effective in maturing the prefrontal lobes and getting the wiring right. And you could look at, the work being done at UCLA Medical School. I mean, a lot of R1 universities, Stanford, Harvard, University of Pennsylvania, are doing a lot of mindfulness research because it's so effective. And Ellen Langer's work at Harvard School of Education was in mindful learning, and very powerful stuff. She was doing this back in the 90s or in the 80s. And so what we did is we measured mindfulness as well. And what they found in doing the study, out of 8 factors, and we did the exploratory and confirmatory factor analysis and stuff to develop this whole thing, was that after the 2-week foundation of leadership course, students improved in 7 of the 8 factors at a statistical level of 0.001 of significance. And with the exception of 2 of these factors, the change remained consistent or improved 4 months later, because we did the measurement before they came in the program, after the 2 weeks, and then at the end of the semester. And then now we have longitudinal data that shows that academically they outperform their peers. Okay, so there's something that's happening there. And this is sort of more details around it, but I don't know if that's really important at this point. So that's what we did. But more importantly, in our last study, which was a 6-year longitudinal study, we did several things. One was we interviewed over 400 students. And they found that these students were developing 21st century professional skills, but giving them the ability to see the styles of other people, giving them the ability to understand how teams worked, giving them the ability to be leaders innately, and then teaching them how to work on teams, which is the second half of that week-long thing. What they found in this study, that many of these students we had gone through the program 15 years before. 15 years before. These are 400 students that they interviewed. These students remembered exercises that they went through. They remembered the terminology. They remembered the experiences they had. Because when you do experiential education, you do something where they experience something at a very deep level, it shifts them. And it has a more permanent basis to it, besides having, a rites of passage type of design, which we did. So this last study I'll share with you is a 6-year longitudinal study. And this is the salary outcomes. So if you look at this 2-credit. So what we did was we had a nursing cohort in Watsonville at Salinas College, and the president of the college said, we're having problems in our nursing program. It's our best program. We have if you look at Salinas, it's 90% Latinos community, and a lot of farm workers there in Salinas Valley. And so she felt that if they could turn around their nursing program, its attrition rate was not good. That would actually change things. So we brought it in, did a 1 week with them. We contextualized it for medicine and nursing, and we took them through the same experience. And so then that was back in 2009 that we took the faculty through that experience, and then did the pilot that summer. And so we had, 5 or 6 years, we had 480 nursing students that had gone through this experience. And so we did a propensity score match comparison group, but the comparison group was the nursing program, before they changed it over, because when they changed it over, all students had to go through it. So there was no selection bias in the study. And so they compared it to the students that went beforehand for a number of years, and they matched them doing propensity score match comparison group. And what they found was 6 years later, the students that went through that 1 week, and that's all they went through because they changed nothing else in the program. Students that went through that 1 week had close to a over $40,000 median salary difference. And I call that promotion readiness. We're not just getting our students ready for college, we're getting them ready for professional lives where they're promotion ready, because they are leaders now, and it shows. And what we had heard anecdotally before this from the faculty is that the 2nd year clinicals were transformed because of this change that we had made in their program, but we wanted the hard data. So we now have the actually salary differences.
I think those metrics to me are so off the charts in terms of the impact, because clearly just impacting someone on an individual level in terms of them understanding themselves, that's altruistic, right? I think that's making the world a better place, one relationship at a time. But when it translates to earning potential, when it translates to earning power, and we heard this yesterday with Dr. Morris Singer and Dr. Smithson, we need to teach students, in their instance, not just the science of medicine, but the art of medicine. You could say that in the college education world, you could say that in the corporate world. You don't need to teach someone how to do a spreadsheet. You need to teach the person about the team that's going to interact with the spreadsheet as much as the spreadsheet. And I think that to me is something that definitely resonates. And I know for many others on the call, that resonates too. Were there any other anecdotes, not statistically in terms of earning power, but again, to your point around, it made me ready to lead. you know, the soft skills, but really the ability to understand, connect, and pull people in a certain direction. I was curious if there were any other anecdotes around that, kind of what it did for them in their professional careers.
Well, not exactly professional careers, but in terms of their leadership. You know, so my students came from colorful backgrounds, you know, very high percentage of them. And so in terms of Cabrillo College, you know, they like to recruit students that are going into the honors program, you know, and so they're looking for really good, you know, high school students that didn't actually leave home, you know, and so we have all these supports for them, but my program focuses on a different population, helping them become effective college students. Well, over the years that I was at Cabrillo College, and I started to look at it when I left in 2018, because I came back to the foundation and I was visiting, and I picked up the student newspaper, and they were introducing the new president of the student body, and it was another one of my students. And so then I looked back and I saw that out of, I think, 13 years of student body presidents, something like 8 of them were from my program. You know, and these are students that didn't do well in school when they came to college, and they didn't have a sense of themselves as a high performer. And here they are, leaders. You know, I had this one student, it was that was my first semester. So he came in to that, you know, that beginning program where it's immersion, and he was wearing a hood. And this is before hoodies became, you know, known. He was wearing a hood, and he would sit there, and he didn't talk much at all. And I would see it was kind of dark feeling, you know, it was just this feeling I had. He had this hood over his head, and during the breaks, he wouldn't go outside with the other students. He would sit there and he would be reading a book. And so then I just went up to him, talked to him, said, "Hey, you know, how you doing? Blah, blah, blah." And I find out this book he has is taped together because he was in prison and they didn't allow them to read books. So what the prisoners would do is they would rip apart the book, and they would pass, you know, like the first chapter underneath the bars, and it would go around, and they would send the second chapter. I guess he was at the end because he got the full book, and this book had an impact on him. I think it might have been Malcolm X's autobiography, something like that. And it had an impact on him. And, you know, 2 days later, his hood was off. You know, not only that, a year later, he was one of the student senators. You know, the things just transform in students when they figure out who they are and what their strengths are, and how to be a leader. And it's not just professionals, you know, working at Hewlett Packard, or, you know, I worked at Apple, and it's not those environments. I mean, those environments, yes, you know, but they're already in those environments. These are talking about students that are coming off the streets, coming out of programs where they're adjudicated. You know, it's very powerful.
And I think, again, oftentimes there's people assume that in order to be a leader, you need a title. You can be a leader in your kids' soccer, you know, group. It can be with your neighbors. It can be in an emergency. There's a lot of different ways that leadership can show up. And so, to me, I think that's completely validating, you know, why I joined the company in the first place, was believing that this has an impact well outside the corporate world. It has an impact in personal lives, as I think I shared with everybody. Not to repeat myself, I'm an effortless plus excite, effortless execute, and I'm happily married to an abundant examine. Well, that probably wouldn't have happened and made, you know, been as easy if I hadn't had that self-awareness as well as that lens and to kind of look at everything. Before we open it to questions, and I know we have a few other academics on the line. One of the things on your website, and it's a quote that I thought is just, again, perfectly summarizes kind of the opportunity that we have beyond kind of the great work that you've been doing, but to really kind of take this everywhere, is education is not filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. And I think, to me, that's really just a cool embodiment of when you do have a student, everything you just described that happened for those students, it was a lighting of a fire within them. And I think that, to me, again, really translates to making the world a better place and helping them be happier, more successful, more satisfied in wherever their careers take them. So
one thing I'd like to mention, you know, a lot of times people think this is a personality test, or they were calling it learning styles assessment. And what I found is that the research shows that learning styles are not real. Okay, they are, and there's no correlation they're finding. And I can give you the references to the studies. But what we're finding is working styles are real. Hewlett Packard
Mhm.
invests in it. These companies invest in it because this is real. And if you teach these students something that's real, which working styles are, it's very powerful. Now, the quote that I like, I'll share with you the quote that I share with my students. It's not on our website. It's from Peter Drucker. The success in the knowledge economy, which is the future, comes to those who know themselves, their strengths, their values, and how they best perform. And so, that I sort of orient the students towards getting to know themselves, because once they do that, they're able to be in the world in a way that will have impact.
Yeah, and a lot of our speakers have talked about, and Heather was talking about it earlier, about sometimes, it's kind of a cold splash of water when you read your assessment. Some people think it's spot on. Other people really are grappling with, like, is this really me? And so I think part of that journey for everybody, some people are ready to go and ready to accept, and it's that Kubler change curve, right? Some people are in denial to start before they kind of go through it all. But I guess talk to me a little bit about when you did have students that were in that experience and they didn't agree with what was kind of being presented in front of them. What did you think their, not problems were, but like what was in their way to kind of accepting maybe the truth?
So I have two types of students. One
Yeah.
student are the colorful students I've talked about, and students that aren't prepared for college. Real, students. My other students are faculty, administrators, and staff people. And I find that faculty and administrators come in totally armored, many of them. And so my students don't have the issue you just raised, but my students that are faculty and administrators sure do. And I just had it this summer, and so the first day, because these are long days, they're from 9 to 5. The first day, I feel the arrows coming at me, from a couple people. But, I look at their styles and I go, oh, of course it's going to be like this, and so then I don't take it in, I just let things go by, because I know 2 days later they're going to be praising and they're going to be falling in love and all this stuff. And it's like, okay, let them go through what they need to go through. So the proof is in the pudding. I mean, at the end of the 5 days, they fill out an assessment and stuff. The students are not the students, the faculty and the administrators are transformed, and they stay transformed. I was working with, so I was at Cal State Los Angeles this summer, working with their summer faculty that, let's see, 12 were from the English department. I'm going to get this wrong, but something like that. And 12 were from the statistics and the pre-calc department. And so, so I took these 25 faculty through this experience, and we met with them just a week or so ago, and they're still talking about it. And this happened in June, and we don't have a longitudinal effect yet of what it did for the students, which we have other studies that show that. But for this cohort that I took through in June, we don't have it from the summer yet. But it impacts them, and it not only impacts them, as I've read in some of these texts and these chats items, but it's personally. I have, at the end of these programs, usually they'll come up to me and they'll say, hey, do you do one for spouses? My spouse is telling me how much I've learned, and, I think it'd be important for them to go through this too. Do you do it for couples? And it's like, well, no, I don't. And so there's this real interest in getting to know themselves. And I find, one of the reasons why the students do so well academically is that the learning curve and learning to see the styles of other people, the learning curve of learning how to listen and communicate and work effectively, which is the first week of our program, they're going home and they're looking at everybody around them in their lives and figuring it all out. So this learning curve is very steep. And when the brain is learning, the brain is learning. It doesn't matter if they're learning about styles of other people or they're learning math or English. I mean, you're getting the brain, getting it wired for the learning process. So
it's funny when you describe kind of the math department and the English department, not that there are generalizations, but there are archetypes depending on, energetic archetypes in terms of, and patterns that you see. And I think, again, a lot of comments that other speakers have shared too is when you have a common language like 5 dynamics, you don't take it personal because you understand that's that person's first step. And that's just where their first step kind of goes. One of the questions, Diego, yeah, go ahead.
Tyler, this summer with that group, the math and statistics faculty, all but one were Asian. And the one all were born in Asia. The one that wasn't was born here, but was also Asian. And I had conversations with them in between the breaks, during the breaks and during lunch, because I wanted to know, is this cultural? And is this just a US thing? And what I was finding is that some cultures lean towards certain styles, but they have all the styles in their culture in terms of the individuals. And so it was a fascinating conversation I was having with these individuals, because I had a certain stereotype, if you will, about path and certain cultural backgrounds. So sorry about taking you off your question.
No, I mean, look, regardless of what culture, everybody has all the energies. It's just dynamics. It's just a matter of how much energy it takes you to go through each dynamic. So a question from the audience. You talked a lot about students knowing themselves. What about from the other perspective, with the teacher knowing how the students learn? So meaning, if you're an abundant examine and I'm an effortless excite, how have you seen from how you teach students in those moments, how taking into account their energetic profile, how that changes how you're delivering information?
So in the 1 week training we do with faculty and administrators, they work on a project of how would they adapt this to their lives and to their profession. And so the faculty start to redesign their curriculum so that they're doing things that not only focuses on the examine and the execute styles, they're also looking at the other two styles and figuring out how to do that. And so they start to change their curriculum so that it's more experiential. Because when you make it more experiential and you follow a project based on the student success, this success satisfaction cycle, then you're able to cover all the styles. So the faculty start to bring that out. I haven't heard faculty talk too much about, they figure out the style of a student and then they talk to them in a certain way. I think they actually their curriculum so it actually affects students differently. And they know their own style, so they know when they're getting into trouble. And so I think that helps them a lot. Yeah.
I mean, a personal example is I can remember some of the best, professor experiences in which, again, because of my, energetic profile, I'm a talker, right? I'm moving my hands around. I need to movement. Let's go walk and talk, right? I constantly say that often with my team. And professors that I loved would actually meet me kind of in that moment. Hey, let's walk to the library. Let's go get a coffee. Whereas other professors are like, you show up at this time, I need to know your questions ahead of time, and I'm going to tell you. That style didn't work for me. And so again, you can kind of imagine the benefit that, what if, in addition to the curriculum, in addition to that self-awareness, that there was also that kind of the interworkings that happen, at a collegiate level, what that can just help a student that might be struggling along, give them a little more, of an oomph. So another question, this is a personal question for you. What's your 5 dynamics profile? Everybody's guessing.
Yeah, we could have them all guess. So Karen, I have problems with this because I think of the old model, so I have to. Okay, so I am extreme.
Abundant.
Yeah. Oh, abundant. Oh,
abundant versus extreme, but abundant explorer.
Yeah, abundant explorer, and then is it effortless still? Effortless. Okay, so I'm effortless excite. And
either deliberate or reserved are the only other two that you haven't said. But
I'm deliberate. I'm deliberate in the other two.
Okay.
But I find that when I'm stressed out, I'm high execute. So I have a fallback. Yeah.
Cool. If anybody else has any other questions, we'll put them in the chat. But we're pretty much coming right up on time. So if we didn't get to your questions, as we've said before, we'll put them into the recap that we do. But Diego, on behalf of the whole Simpli5 team, thank you for not just joining us today, but the work that you've been doing with students that clearly are benefiting in their lives and beyond, with kind of the tailwinds that you're helping them catch, just kind of at the right time. So appreciate you joining us today.
Well, thank you for all that you all have been doing. You've been supporting me for years, and I really appreciate that. Not any company would do that. And I appreciate, because we've gone through a lot of different changes with different funders and stuff. So I really appreciate you hanging in there with us.
Yeah, totally. Cool. Well, thank you, Diego. And now for, as Monty Python says, something completely different, but in the reframe kind of moment, or I should say theme, I am excited to welcome our final speaker, who is actually not anything that we've heard thus. He's not a doctor, he's not a learning and development leader, but he is someone who kind of lives and thrives in the kind of reframe moment every day. So Jayce Hall, who's going to join me on the main stage, is an artist who hails from Fargo, North Dakota. And his art challenges the beholder to really think about what they are seeing, and upon closer inspection has some surprises in store. And so Jayce, we kind of found Jayce through some travel that the team was kind of currently underway. And I think with oftentimes what 5 dynamics and the methodology really does for an individual in terms of kind of understanding yourself, but then there's this kind of growth and trajectory from there. His art really spoke to us. So Jayce, welcome to our Leader Summit. And I guess first off, would love for you to just kind of give it a little introduction on yourself, your background, and maybe for those that aren't familiar with you, kind of where did your journey with art start, and kind of your creativity come from?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Like you guys said, my name is Jayce Hall. I'm an artist. I specialize in a style now. It's called micrography. So everything that I do is using words, names, and phrases. So it's kind of like if pointillism and crosshatching, just a few different styles, had a baby. And so the drawings are about as intricate as they sound. They usually take a hot minute to do, but they've been turning out cooler and cooler. A little bit about my art story is, so I grew up, a lot of people think that artists have always been artists, like when you're a kid and stuff like that, but I was really musical. That's what made sense to me. I could doodle a little bit, but it was just like drawing my favorite cartoon characters. It was nothing too impressive. Just kind of like went about life. And one year, I did college for 1 year, and my first semester, it was mostly to like appease my parents to go. So my first semester, I took a lot of the more standard classes. My second semester, I was like, if I'm paying for this, might as well try some classes that I find interesting. And so I had a New Year's resolution, actually, that I wanted to be able to draw a reasonably good face by the end of the year. And it was a lot of fun, but I realized quickly I was the only non-art major in the class. And so I was just surrounded by all these art gods. And it was just like a little bit intimidating, but it was a really, really big sponge environment for me. Everybody was really encouraging. And I had a professor that he was really cool. He was like, he said it in a nicer way, but he's like, if you draw 15 minutes a day, eventually you'll figure it out. Like, it's just your hand needs to learn how to do what your head's telling you to do. And so at that point, I wasn't feeling school anymore, dropped out, but I was enjoying still doing my little 15-minute drawings every day. We fast forward a little while. I was living in Honolulu, Hawaii on a whim. I got invited by a friend of a friend, and one thing led to another, and I had a little bit of a tricky situation where I wasn't getting enough hours in, like, to work. So I was only getting scheduled 11 to 13 hours a week in the fourth most expensive city in America. Yeah. I think totally. 4 is probably like 3 or something. It's 3 or 4, something like that. And so I quickly ran out of money. I was freaking out. I was like, I didn't know where my next meal was going to come from. So I started posting more, started telling people like, hey, if anybody wants to pay for my dinner, I'll draw you a turtle or something like that. And so I just like posting more. Luckily I had a lot of people that were interested. And so that's actually how my art career started. But another thing that the professor was so into that really ingrained in me was to always be trying different things. And so throughout the year, so that was in 2019 was when I sold my first little drawing. So I was so excited, little Jayce. And so, yeah, since then I tried style after style after style. I heard about this one. It's been around for a while. But most of the time that I would see it, it was a little bit more cartoonish or caricature-y, where it'd just be basically like filling in the black shadows and then not having much detail. So I was wondering, is it possible to make something realistic in this style. So it's kind of like that idea of like reframing your perspective on something was. So I asked the question, and for the last 3.5 years, I've been trying to answer that, and the drawings have just been getting crazier and crazier. I'm so thrilled with how things have been going, and I've been doing this full time for about a year now, which I'm so grateful for, and getting all these fun opportunities. And yeah, that's a bit of my story.
Right on. Yeah, I mean, again, I think when it was kind of this two ships crossing in terms of the theme reframe, and then your art was kind of, again, it was like kind of no brainer. So why don't we do so kind of the reveal. So you've actually been working on a piece for the summit.
Yeah.
Let's kind of show the audience and maybe do a little storytelling on what the story is within it.
Yeah, so this is the piece that we put together. It turned out really, really fun. The whole idea was to just kind of show progression and moving forward. It's kind of the vibe that I got from it. You guys will see later in a video a lot more of the details that are going on in this one, but I can explain it real quick. So basically, so I'm trying to hold it relatively still. Yeah, the person and the water can and the soil were the things that have remained consistent. So the person, this is made by just writing consistency a whole bunch of times. The water can is writing curiosity over and over, and the soil is just writing 5 dynamics, thousands and thousands of times. And so as we go along further, it basically gets from simpler little sapling all the way to a full-grown tree. So the very first idea is like the awareness of something that you want to grow. So we're writing awareness for that whole little tree. As we start to grow, get a little bit bigger, we become like a little bit more aware. And so we wrote awareness for the whole tree and the roots. And as we keep progressing, we get to this guy. And this one was made just by writing growth a bunch of times, because this is like the phase that you start to experience growth. And then we finally get to the full mature tree. And this was made, the whole trunk and everything was made by writing Simpli5. And then the leaves, that was made by writing satisfaction. And the roots on this one were actually peace and understanding, because that's just the idea that you get. And then the clouds are fun. Those are a little late addition. Those just say Simpli5 as well, I believe. But yeah, you guys will get a chance to see a little bit more of the process, a little bit more of the details going forward. But yeah, it's a really fun little piece.
Yeah, super, super cool. So don't take just Jayce's word for it. Let's actually look at a short video. So Elizabeth, let's roll tape and get a little bit behind the scenes on how that piece came together. So I think there's 2 quotes that popped to mind. One, I was driving the other day, and it's like, objects in the mirror might be closer than they appear, which again is not exactly what this is, but really the sum is greater than the parts, right? And that to me is, I think, kind of a fun kind of take on what it looks like from a distance. And then when you actually zoom in, there's something richer and there's a little more detail. And I think with some of your other pieces that you've done, whether it's sports figures, etc., again, you see something, but then when you go closer, and to me, that's what's really so cool about art, there's layers of interpretation. And I think clearly with the amount of detail, meaning microscopic detail, there's a whole bunch of different elevations to get to. So, for those that might be interested in what you do or where they can find you, throw out some handles and some sites and some marketing sites. Go for it.
Yeah. I can type it in here in a minute, but my whole thing, all my socials, all the stuff like that is just Jayce Hall Arts, and I'll type it in the chat, but it's JayceHallArt. And I was just like, a thing to go off of what you're saying is, I feel like one of the coolest ideas with this style is kind of, the closer you get, the more details you're going to be able to see, and that just is so true with so many ideas where it's like, okay, if we're looking at this broadly, we can look at it broadly, but like, let's get in depth. Let's see what's going on. But yeah, so I love that.
Yeah, super cool. Well, you don't need your Simpli5 frames to see anything differently, but for those that are curious and watching the video again, it's going to be posted in the virtual lobby. So as you exit the main stage, if you wanted to view it again, it's there for you. Definitely check out Jayce's website. A lot of really cool stuff that's there across a whole spectrum. But Jayce, thanks again for contributing to this summit. The art piece is super cool, and I think it's going to have a very happy home somewhere at one of the Simpli5 team members, whether it's headquarters or one of our homes. So it's a piece that we'll definitely treasure for years to come.
Love that. Love that.
Cool. All right. Well, we are now going to transition to the final piece of our 2-day summit, and I'm going to welcome back to the stage founder and CEO Karen Gordon for some closing comments. Thanks, everybody.
Oh, sorry. I thought I was muted, but I see that the host took care of that. Good. Thank you. Frantically looking for buttons here. Okay, so just a bit of housekeeping first. Be sure to fill out your survey before you leave today. You can find that back in the oh my gosh, Tyler, what's my word here? Not main stage, but
virtual event lobby.
Thank you, virtual event lobby. And we want to hear from you so we can get a little bit better every year. You'll be also receiving a recap of this year's event tomorrow and communications about next year's event within the next couple of months. So stay tuned for those things. So as our 2023 Leader Summit draws to a close, I want to thank the 5 Dynamics team, in particular, the Leader Summit planning team, Tyler Plant, Mofita DeBabo, and Ashley Gordon, for putting together a jam-packed 2 days of thought-provoking and relevant content. I also want to thank our producers, Elizabeth and Dorita. Dorita was working behind the scenes, but they both contributed greatly to the success of today and yesterday's event. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge Jayce, our artist, for sharing his time and his talents with us. I discovered Jayce in Savannah while attending my sister's art show. I was drawn to his work as I felt like it aligned perfectly with this year's theme. I came back to view his work so many times that I think that he was about ready to call security. But I just couldn't believe how beautifully he reframed his art and provided us with a concrete example of our summit topic. Well, we've had an incredible 2 days. Here are just a few of the thought-provoking comments that I captured, and I'm sure that you captured many more. Edie Weiner said it best when she said, from mankind to mindkind. It doesn't matter where we're working from or what we're wearing or what our physical abilities are. What we need to be able to access and harness is the power of each person's mind, leaning into the neurodiversity and the unique experience every single one of us has. The concept of educated incapacity was really interesting as well. I loved her concrete suggestions of subscribing to 2 publications that you have no interest in and 1 political publication that doesn't support your views in order to be able to grow. Dr. Morse Singer and Dr. Smithson opened our eyes to the challenges facing the healthcare system today and how Intend Health Strategies focused on improving the level of care by embedding Simpli5 and other growth strategies in their student curriculum, practitioner practices, and their patient experiences. Kevin Bishop's approach to career development was simple yet effective. Dream, plan, and activate. Today, we heard amazing ways to reframe our thinking around teamwork and to consider the moment that work is in from Heather. And we also learned how Simpli5 went back to its roots in education through the incredible work that Diego is doing. And we were able to see a physical manifestation of Reframe to bring it all home. You know, a quote that I liked is, if a problem can't be solved within the frame it was conceived, the solution lies in reframing the problem. That was from Brian McGreevy in Hemlock Grove. And I felt like it was a nice way to kind of wrap us up today. So how are you going to reframe and show up with the intent moving forward? What are you inspired to do differently? Just wanted to say, be sure to mark your calendars now for the first week in October of 2024, as we'll be gathering again for our 3rd annual Simpli5 Summit. There's a pre-registration link in the lobby as well. So go ahead and sign up to make sure that you'll be the first to know about next year's event. I'm looking forward to more conversations and more connections next year. We'll continue to bring together amazing speakers and engaging activities. Thank you all for your participation, and I can't wait to see you next year.